Let's compare a Levi's jacket from the 1990s. So this is a vintage Levi's that's made in the US, as you can see, against something that is sold in the Levi's store right now. So this was bought, I just bought this. This is that same jacket, except it's 2025 and no longer 1995. And it's made in Bangladesh. So we're going to focus on the fabric, we're going to focus on the stitching quality, we'll focus on the quality of the buttons, we'll focus on the dimensional accuracy, we'll look at the color fading, and we'll look at the wear and tear, and then I'll give it a total score. Okay, so let's start with the fabric quality. The fabric quality, so on the right is my vintage Levi's, and on the left is the modern Levi's. So this shot sort of clearly shows the difference in the fabric quality. You'll realize the gaps as the weave happens is much more pronounced on the vintage Levi's. It's not so, this is, a much thinner fabric. This is a much thicker, it's a much more coarser fabric. You should be able to hear sound, not so much on this. So yes, the vintage fabric is definitely of a much higher quality than the modern fabric, which has a sort of a downy nature to it, which typically clothes will have. You can see it's all beginning to fray, even though this is brand new. Whereas if you look at this, you'd realize it's a much thicker and a much more higher quality weave. So definitely the fabric is better on the vintage Levi's. Now let's look at the quality of the stitching. The stitching on the vintage Levi's is standard. You can see it's pretty good. They used to have good quality control in the days. So let's look at let's pull up the modern and see. This also seems pretty good. It's, you can see, so the slightly thicker thread that they're using. Typically, if it's a thicker thread, you would realize that they just don't have enough strength, that they're having to use it for that extra strength. Whereas this is a much more denser thread. A good way to understand the quality of stitching is to look at places that you typically would not see. So if you are looking at the quality of a suit, you always want to look at the insides of a suit to see how did the tailor actually weave the suit. So if you look at this thread, yeah, it's pretty tight. Now let me look at the modern one. Yeah, it's much cleaner, but it's not so tight. You can definitely see the difference between the two is. So this is the modern. So remember, on the right is the vintage, okay? So vintage has, you can see it's done by hand, which is why there's loose threads everywhere. Whereas the modern one, they are a lot more neater in how they did it. They definitely paid more attention. So I would say this is a tie. They really are just as the quality of stitching is the same. Okay, so let's give equal points for both. Now let's look at the quality of the buttons. So there's this nice brass coppery finish that the old buttons had from Levi's. This is pretty high quality. They're stainless steel. It's nice shiny stainless steel with the brass cap on top. Where with the modern one, yeah, there is a clear difference where with the quality of buttons that The older one definitely seems a lot higher quality than the newer one. Now, of course, this does not have that the polish that these buttons take over time. You have to wear it and then you will get that polish. This, I'm sure, has a flat finish right now, but if you wear it, it will get that polished view. Okay. So remember, that's the vintage, that's the modern. They really do look the same on the camera. Dimensional accuracy. This is going to be interesting. So I'm going to look at this part of the jacket and the back where they have this. It's really a fashion element. I don't know anybody who would tighten that up on the waist. So let's compare the two. This is the vintage, that's the modern. You know, the old vintage one, back in the days, if you looked at, let's look at parts of the jacket to compare. I would say the modern one actually has a better cut than the vintage one. And I'll tell you why. Modern ones, these are all cut using machines. So machines are very accurate when it comes to sizing the pieces. And I know these, even in the 90s, they were using machines in the US to cut these. But for some reason, when you look at the dimensional accuracy, you'd realize there's, a greater distance. It's a shorter distance. If you look at that pocket, there's a clear difference on the vintage. This is a bit more accurate, the dimensioning. So, I would say this is a tie where they're both equally good or equally bad based on how you perceive it. Okay, so this is a tie. Now let's look at the color fade. Color fade is a little hard to do because color fade, the older jacket has 30 plus years of washes to give it its fabulous washed look, whereas this jacket has essentially been washed using acid in an industrial washer to give it its lived-in look. There is obviously no doubt that the old one is better when it comes to color fade. You can clearly see how there's, in the old one, there are dark patches, there are light patches, whereas this is a lot flatter in its color. It's typical of what you'd get with, say, natural fade compared to machine wash fade. So obviously the machine wash fade is nothing like the natural fade out there. Now let's look at the wear and tear. Again, it's hard to look at wear and tear on something that's old, that's brand new. But as you wash this does get a little bit of wear. And if I look at the new one closely, it is definitely beginning to show signs of fraying on the edges. Now let me look at the vintage one, and the vintage one has a much more natural. I think this really doesn't have that much wear and tear because I have to compensate for the fact that this is 30 years old, more than 30 years old. So this is actually in very good shape. Let's look at the collar. Yeah, the collar is in good shape on the vintage one. Let's look at this is brand new, so there'll be no wear and tear on the new jacket. So I would say in terms of wear and tear, the vintage one definitely beats the modern one. So it's definitely the vintage one goes for the win. So if I total it up, we really are looking at a 5-2 result, because if I add it up, so We've got fabric quality, vintage is better. Stitching quality, it's a tie. Buttons, vintage is better. Dimensional accuracy, they're both the same. Color fading, vintage is better. Wear and tear, vintage is better. So it's 5 and 2. So yeah, there's obviously, you already knew the answer to that for this question, is vintage is better than modern when it comes to the quality of a Levi's jacket. But remember, this one cost $60 in the 1990s. This one cost $60 or $9.90. I don't remember how much it actually cost. Basically, this was about 5 times more expensive in 1990s than this one is in the modern one is. So, folks, you're getting the same product for a much cheaper price if you buy it these days. So, I'm happy to sacrifice quality to save some money. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you on a later video.